Lord, yes, papi. Hit me one time and make it funky.
I was brought up and told to have no fear. I was brought up and told to have no fear. I was brought up and told to have no fear.
Welcome to the Full Circle Podcast. I'm one of your hosts, David Roberts, along with the OG Dr. Neil Holmes and the oral historian, Andre Taylor. Gentlemen, it continues. What else could we possibly talk about today other than the Derek Chauvin trial, of course, which has been ongoing, and the murder, I should say, the lynching, however you want to call it, of Daunte Wright. Since Derek Chauvin has been ongoing, let's talk about Daunte Wright first. And both of you, I'll just get your takes on it. Dre, why don't we start with you?
I can honestly say I'm baffled as to how you can figure out how do you come to the conclusion that your gun is your taser. And you know, I watched the gentleman, all the officers that were there, when she said taser, 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 they backed up, but nobody looked and said, hey, that's not your taser, that's your gun. Nobody stepped in and said anything about it. And from my experience as a law enforcement reporter for a number of years, you know, I've been very much around the training that happens with officers that go through the training to use their tasers, because you don't just get a taser. There's special training that you have to go through as an officer before they will administer you one. So 26 years on the force. I don't know when her last time she trained using a taser, but you're holding a gun and your gun is always on your dominant side. The taser is always off to another side. So the two are never on the same side at any time. They're not supposed to be, you know. So it bothers me, because here's a young man who he had a misdemeanor warrant. Right. You know, at that point, you pulled him over, you have his information, meet him at his house. You know, there's no reason to pull a gun on anybody during a traffic stop like that unless your life is in danger. Oh, that's right, he was black and she was a white female, so her life was in danger. You know, when I see that, it bothers me, because one thing that we see is the slaughtering of a black man, 20-year-old man. You know, he's a father, but we're not even addressing the traumatic issue that comes with the mothers of these young men and husbands and wives and sisters getting a knock at the door saying your loved one's not coming home. You know, that's something else that I think that needs to be talked about, because the young man's life is gone, but the traumatic part is for those that are still living. And anybody that's seen the response from his aunt, she's hurt, and she should be hurt. You know, but then you have this white officer, to avoid losing her pension, resigns so she can keep everything intact. And also, because she resigned and wasn't fired because of what happened in the line of duty, she can go apply for another job as a police officer. So I have a lot of problems with that.
And that's interesting, because I didn't know that myself, that she could, go and, apply for another job as a police officer. And the interesting thing, and I have two takeaways from it. First of all, why was the taser pulled? Even if you thought you were pulling a taser, why was the taser pulled? Why did you feel the need to taser this man? He was not a threat. And if you were to say, I need to arrest him for this misdemeanor warrant, you notice she never said, you have a misdemeanor warrant. We looked into the computer, we found a warrant. We're going to have to take you in. She never said that. When she said, get out of the car, he's like, why, am I in trouble? And she didn't explain herself. And so, because when you're pulled over, and Dre, you know more about this than I do, but when you're pulled over for a traffic stop, you really don't, by law, you don't have to get out the car when they say get out the car. Now, if there's a warrant and I'm under arrest and I can get out the car, then tell me I'm under arrest. So she failed to communicate, but this is someone who has 26 years on the force. So
well, I think there is a court decision that says you have to get out the car if they request for you to get out the car. I think that's come before the Supreme Court and whatever. But the problem is, like you say, why do people want to when it's an African involved, especially a young African male? Is there always this resort to overwhelming force? And like you said, that taser is on the left side, not on the right side. It's got a different feel, a different heft, and the whole bit. But the big thing, she was a trainer, and she was supposed to be, in fact, in training another a new officer right at the point of that stop. Chauvin was a trainer, so you have these people training, and I think the guy years ago who arrested Skip Gates at his home,
yes,
was also a trainer.
mm-hmm.
So what do the trainers do? Do the trainers teach you how you can avoid, how you can get around restrictions? Do the trainers, are some of the trainers really more involved in trying to show you how not to get caught, how to get away with things? But if we had a guy in Richmond who ended up getting killed, who was a trainer. He was a state trooper, and went into, it was doing a training session, and they went to the Greyhound bus station and started harassing folks. And it was a brother from Chicago. He didn't know what was going on. He pulled his pistol out and shot the cop. And so you have, you have these kind of weird training sessions ongoing. And sometimes these trainers are pretty, don't seem to know what they're doing.
And you know what it makes me think about? In my school, we have a school police officer, good guy. Mm-hmm. And so the students joke with him and stuff. So one of the students joked with him. He was standing around. She's like, "What you doing? What you supposed to be doing?" And he looked at her. He's like, "Are you safe?" You know, like that. So to me, as a police officer, your job is to keep people safe. And if I'm a training officer, I should be training officers to de-escalate the situation. And one thing that I've learned, because I almost see myself as, being in education, kind of like a first cousin of police officers, in many cases. So if I'm in a hallway and I tell a student, I'll say to a student, "Where you supposed to be?" or something, and then he, snaps back at me or says something, whatever the case may be, that doesn't really happen. But if that happens, and I run to the, principal and say, "I want this kid suspended," am I doing that because I'm trying to teach this kid to be respectful of authority? Or am I mad and I want revenge and I want to suspend a kid over something minor? And sometimes I think there's situations with these police officers, whereas if you don't jump and say how high, when I say jump, I'm going to show you who's boss, like the gentleman who was killed recently. I hate the fact that I can't call his name. Maybe one of you remembers, but in that situation, the officer said, I think, sit on the ground or something. This is a grown man, in his 40s, and he's like, the guy was like, "For what?" He's like, "Because I told you to." And the guy was like, "Well, who are you?" So, he wasn't a kid like Daunte Wright. Legally an adult, but we all know a 20-year-old is, pretty much basically right out of their teens. And another thing that I think about, and then I want to turn it over to you. I don't, definitely don't want to hog the conversation, was that when I saw his mother, and she's Caucasian. And it's interesting that when whites have an interracial child, they usually would say, "I'm raising a black man," or I'm raising a black woman. And they say, "Yes, I want them to appreciate my side of the family too, but society is going to see them as a black boy, a black young man, or a black young lady." And they know that, they are well aware of that. And this was definitely an instance where he was seen by that cop as a young black man. Same thing with Barack Obama. The people that hated him, they didn't care that he had a white mother. They just saw a black man, So,
some if they knew, would hate you even more. And I think, and one of the cases that we haven't looked at is the kid up in Chicago, Latino kid who was shot with his hands up after after a foot chase. It's something to do with I don't like that term people of color. I prefer colonized people, you know, Black folks, Latinos, Native people. It's something in terms of putting us in our place, whether you're a policeman or police officer, or if you're a teacher, because in Virginia, what we find is that teachers are more likely to criminalize behavior, which is that of an African child, whether it's a male or a female, and they're more likely to punish the kid if he's a Black kid. If you take the same misbehavior in the classroom, and the child who gets the punishment is going to tend more often to be the Black child for the same behavior that the white child gets. So throughout the society, this is why they call it systemic. Those folks in authority will deal with the Black person, whether it's a student in the classroom, someone at a traffic stop, or whatever, in a different way than they would deal with the same person or same type of person, age and so forth, and the same type of behavior if that other behavior and that other person was to be white. And that's part of the thing we are being. It's just like, and it's a continuation from slavery. We're still being policed. Anybody can be our overseer, and as we walk around, we try to navigate this plantation called United States.
And, you know, another thing that gets me, Dr. Holmes, and I had your class at Cheney. You know, I made a mistake by coming to your class late. You know, I made a mistake by drinking my kids' apple juice that was in the refrigerator. You know, I made a mistake by cutting somebody off in traffic, and nobody got hurt. I don't understand the term "she made a mistake" when it came to the life of a Black man. And, you know, like I said before, I've got experience in the media, so I know how the game goes. Yeah. You know, at your press conference, it was a mistake. She meant to get her taser, but she pulled her service weapon. That's not a mistake. That's not a mistake. And then I look at the jargon that's used, you know, if there's white people killed, it's such a tragedy. You know, this is just a terrible incident. It becomes something that evokes this, I don't know, this empathy within people, you know, the awe moment. You know, a Black person, that was a mistake, you know, moving on, you know, there was nothing more said about it. And it goes to show that 1866 happened where they said, oh, okay, you know, everybody, you know, you all are citizens now. But that 3/5 of a person still rings very loudly in We the People, you know, and you know, you can easily put down an animal. Heck, you know, in some states like Texas, the first day of the hunting season, everybody is off. You know, school is closed. It's a big thing. You know, get your guns, let's go.
Right.
But it bothers me so much that when it happens to somebody who looks like me, even if it's from a biracial, you know, relationship, it doesn't matter at the end of the day. And the term of mistake, I'm sorry to harp on this, but what happens? Who's next? You know, is it you? Is it you, Dr. Holmes? Is it me? You know, who's next? You know, none of us are exempt from this. You know, the worst thing that can happen to us is we get stopped somewhere in the Commonwealth of Virginia where it's a dark road and we try to go to somewhere that's well lit. And next thing you know, we get pepper sprayed. Mm-hmm. Why am I supposed to feel comfortable in this country? Why am I supposed to feel relaxed? That's my problem. And I hear people, and I keep seeing it on social media. Well, why didn't they just comply? Because we have a history in this country of when we do comply, what happens? You know, how many other people in this country have had bombs dropped on them like the Philadelphia police did to people that move?
Right.
Like, who's next? And it's bothersome because, you know, going back to the women's aspect of it, I got 2 daughters. What if they're, you know, 18, 19, 20, and they're out with a friend, a boyfriend, and they get pulled over, and that guy ends up getting shot and killed, and my kids witness that? Do we not address the trauma that exists in the Black community because of all of this? It's not just one single aspect of it where somebody was killed, we protest. Within those protests, there's all kinds of anger, there's all kinds of trauma. and we're not addressing the traumatic impact that this is having on us as a community. And it really bothers me. And in fact, I'm frightened.
Yeah, but I think you can see the trauma in the case that just happened in Virginia, the one you alluded to, where the young man was pepper sprayed at that stop. That young man was related to Eric Garner in New York, who was, killed in a cold-blooded fashion right on the street in New York. And so he had to have some kind of trepidation with, in regarding the police. And he told them, hey, and he was what you call complying, which is had his hands out and everything. And he says, I'm afraid. And what did the guy say? You should be afraid. So, so people are trying to put that fear on us because this is what, this is what this whole period is about. If we go back to the era of intense policing, it occurred after the Black Power movement. And this is when we begin to see the increase in this intensive policing of our communities. And we also begin to see the more militarization of our police forces, where they become really stormtroopers. And this is when our communities, they've always been under siege, but this is where they really become really under siege. So we're in a period that began or intensified in a lot of ways. We became more colonized. I mean, we thought we were free. We thought, that the civil rights and stuff freed us, and that because you could vote now a little better, a little more than now, you were fools, this and that. But in reality, there was intensification of the colonization of us as a people, and the police forces and the teachers, but the police force in particular, are on the front lines of enforcing that. There's a new book out, I can't think of the name of it right now, and you have two former Panthers in that particular book, and they discuss, and one of them had been in prison for years. And one of the things that he points out is that some of the people that were involved in the police forces or the prisons in this country went to Iraq as guardsmen, National Guardsmen, and they were some of the people who were involved in some of the scandals in terms of the policing in Iraq, how they dealt with the Iraqis under their control.
Right.
What they were doing in Iraq and what they did in Guantanamo is simply what they do to us on a daily basis. And so the police forces have always been, the police and the military have always been where you find some of the most right-wing values in the society. And I just read a report that just came out about the kid Rittenhouse up there in Wisconsin who killed those two white protesters, Black Lives Matter protesters. And he's gotten close to $600,000 in this Christian fund website. And a number of those people who sent money were police officers, including one, at least this guy was anonymous, it said, but the email that he used was connected to a Norfolk, Virginia officer or office. So we see that not only do we see just kind of, we see this systemic, and we see the most racist values among the police because that is the core. They provide some of the core for some of this right-wing racist and racism that we see emerging right now. So none of this is an accident. It's part of something that's been going on for some time. It's reaching a critical point. And if it hadn't been for these cell phones and maybe some of the new media, it would be occurring and we wouldn't know about it and wouldn't be that much of a response. But this average of one African a day one African every 2 days has been going on for some time.
You know what's interesting? I just recently looked at just like how as we were sitting here, I was looking at my phone and noticed that it was April 16th. And 32 years ago yesterday, I was arrested. And so I was at a party at Akron on right off campus. And then the police came and broke up the party. And so one of my friends said to the officer, "Why aren't you over there breaking up white parties?" And he said, "Well, they don't make as much noise as you." And so then when they dispersed our party, I'm walking away and I said to my friend, "Man, I can't stand these hunky pigs." I shouldn't have used that term, but this is 1989. I was on fire. And the cop jumped out of his car, grabbed me and arrested me. And, one of my friends said, "Well, doesn't he have freedom of speech?" He said, "This boy doesn't have any rights," and I wouldn't have even known the date or anything until I applied for a job a couple of years ago. And it came up on my record. It didn't stop me, but they had to share the record with me. And I, like, oh, that was the date, so, and what was interesting about that is that my indoctrination, and I think all young Black boys' indoctrination of how the cops feel about us, or how they treat our people starts early. As a little boy, I grew up at a time when you had one TV in the house. Nowadays, I think most people have two, three, or four. But growing up with one TV in the house, I watched what my dad watched. It was really no option. So I'm watching Kojak, Hawaii Five-0. I'm dating myself. But it had me thinking that the cops were the good guys. That's how I thought. I think that's how most little boys think at one time. And I still like to think that sometimes, but it's challenging. And then when I was 7 years old, they built the biggest mall in the world at that time, Randall Park Mall. I mean, it's since been torn down and it was surpassed. And so, my friends and I started hanging out at the mall, when we were teenagers, like teenagers do. And I just noticed how we were treated by security. It was like we were, if we were just sitting down, which that's what a mall is for, they want you to shop, sit down, maybe go to the food court and shop some more. They want you to spend all day day there and spend money there. But if we would just, sit down, even if we'd have a bag in our hand, because of course we had to go get our sneakers from the mall, they'd come up and ask us what we were doing. We would get harassed. So that was kind of like my indoctrination. I was like, I thought the cops were the good guys, but I think with us, it's a little bit different, And then when you start driving, when you're young, living in the area that I lived, a working class Black area called Warrensville Heights. When I went into Shaker Heights, we got pulled over. When I went into Bedford Heights, two adjoining suburbs that had a larger white population than Warrensville did, we would get pulled over for no reason. They didn't try to make up a reason. They're just like, "Where you going? What are you doing?" There were no cell phones at that time. At least no teenagers had them. Maybe doctors had them, and the big cars that sat in the phones that sat in the cars. So that indoctrination started early, and I think that's why Daunte Wright, at 20 years old, was so frightened. You see how frightened he was. Mm-hmm. He wasn't lunging at her; he was backing up. You see that? He was like backing up, like, what is this lady about to do? And then she shoots him. So let's talk about, I think right now she's charged with what? 2nd-degree manslaughter? Okay. Dre, from your experiences as a journalist, a police journalist or community journalist, do you think she will be convicted? What do you think is going to happen?
Honestly, I think a lot of it has to deal with the Derek Chauvin case. Mm-hmm. Because now the governor has gotten involved. You have two cases that are so close. However, you also have a case, what was a couple of years ago, where the Black officer that was up there in Minneapolis, I believe it was, mistakenly killed somebody. I believe he mistakenly used a firearm instead of a taser, or whatever the case was. But he was sentenced to 11 and a half years.
Yeah. Yeah.
So you have a precedent already where you have no choice but to convict. And if you don't, this is not going to ring well. I believe that the people who are protesting now, if this lady doesn't, if both of them get off, it takes me back to of all people, a Prince song, Sign of the Times.
Mm-hmm.
Prince was singing about stuff like this then. I don't think he expected to be in his city, but it's exactly where it is. You know, so you sit back and you think about the officer of color, I forget his name, but 11 and a half years for mistakenly killing somebody. And when he did that, it wasn't said it was a mistake. That came out later. You know, the day after, this police chief, who has since resigned because he realized that the guilt lies with him. You're the chief and you're not making sure your people are trained? Oh, right. You have to go. You know, I would have much rather seen him and her get fired so they wouldn't have that pension, you know, and call me petty for that. But it's like you're still rewarded for doing a bad deed.
Right.
You know, but if I don't foresee anything good coming from this. And I want to be more optimistic, but I've also seen cases where officers have gotten off. So Derek Chauvin, if he gets off, and then this officer, Officer Potter, if she gets off, it's not going to be a good thing up there in Minnesota.
Let's talk realistically, though, about what would happen if they both got off. And the reason I say that is because, and I think I mentioned this in previous podcasts, I've read Dr. Claude Anderson's book, Powernomics. And he mentioned that the reason this happens to us is because we don't have a political base. We elect people and then we don't ask for anything, and we're the only ones that do that. You know, we don't control the economics in our neighborhoods, you know, so on and so forth. You know, I mean, that's a whole nother podcast, and maybe we could address that one day. But if these two officers get off, what will we do? Because I remember George Zimmerman got off for killing Trayvon Martin. We were upset, but did we really do anything? And is it getting to the point where people are looking at our community, and I want both of you to give me your opinion on this. People are looking at our community and saying, okay, they'll talk a lot of stuff on talk radio. They'll protest, you know, they might march, but what's really going to happen?
Yeah.
So is it getting to that point?
Well,
or is it past that point?
Well, you know, we have a thing that we say quantity into quality. And what that means is that in terms of making change, either positive change or negative change, every quantitative input, after you get a certain amount, it creates a whole new qualitative reality. So once you begin to do things, I mean, like you deny Black folks to come into your restaurant, all these kind of things. After you do a certain amount, it creates, you're in a different reality. Or on the other hand, if you begin to, let's say, convict more and more police officers, and give them serious convictions, then that and becomes consistent, that leads into another reality. So I think this really, for me, in the long term, is why I'm a Pan-Africanist, because what we're talking about is the nature of the state. The state is that set of institutions that control violence in a society: police, military, jails, judges, prisons. And you can see the nature of you can define the nature of a state in a particular society by whom that state locks up, who it arrests, who it kills with impunity, etc. And that's primarily us, but it's others, but we are the main ones in the main target. So in order to deal with that in the long term, now what we do in the short term, that's a different question. But in the long term, we have to create a contending state. And for me, that means we have to create an Africa that is strong enough and powerful enough so that it can do certain things. It makes people leery of doing things to other folks. The young man who was the black cop who went to jail really easily was Somalian. He was Somalian. You had a white mayor, white female mayor. The woman that was killed was a white woman. The mayor came out and said, "This guy's got to go." There was no question. It was no kind of niceties to it. They had a quick trial. None of this long-term stuff. Take him, carted him away, locked him up. And the full weight of the state came down on his head, you know, and people's, you know, thought process. So, you know, there's going to be a response. I mean, if both of these folks get off, there's going to be a street response, and there's going to be some political stuff. But in the long term, I mean, we've been responding. I mean, back in the day, the response got to the point you had something called the Black Liberation Army that was out shooting police people, right? And you had, you know, you had all kinds of stuff going on, you know. So after a while, you know, there was one period where people became a little courteous when they made those stops, but that's not long term. That's a short term response. We have to have a long term response in terms of what are we going to build that's going to protect us in the long run. Either you're going to build a new America. How are you going to do that when you see some of these main forces that are against us, you know? So we're going to have to think about what do we build in the long run that can provide the same sort of system that will be protective of us. And that's, you know, and that's my perspective. There's going to be a response. I'm not sure politically if the system can allow these folks to walk completely.
Right.
That's why they give them some outs in terms of some watered down pleas. You know, they're gonna let them. They're not gonna plea out, but you know, they're gonna give them some watered down charges. So, but you know, it's really interesting. I used to go up to Minneapolis. I used to like to hang out in Minneapolis, actually.
I've had a good time in Minneapolis.
Yeah, and you know, and at one time it was a very liberal sort of city. You know, at one time it was very Wisconsin was where, and you had quite a few interracial relationships because when Black men came up to Indianapolis, Wisconsin, they would come up from the South, and they were coming not so much with families, and a lot of the white women were coming from places like the Norway, you know, the Nordic countries, and so they didn't have as much built-in whatever. So you had a lot of these relationships going on, and you had among those Nordic people for a long time this kind of social democracy. A lot of these socialist ideas were going on there, but as the Black population grew, that kind of what we call quote unquote that tolerant kind of which is a word I hate, but that tolerant environment began to change, and also we began to see other migrants coming to the area. A lot of folks from the continent, from Liberia. In fact, the mayor of that town where Daunte was shot is from Liberia itself, so you know, you had a whole different. The suburban piece is different, you know, as we move into the suburbs, and as as poverty grows in the suburbs, and as diversity grows in the suburbs, there's a whole new something that's about to. It could be a good thing that's going to come out of this thing, or it could be something very bad. It depends on how much work we put in.
Okay, and Dre, I know we're running short on time, so Dre, why don't we give you the last word? You tell us, what do you think will happen if both of these, I don't say murderers, get off, or what should happen?
Regardless tonight if they get off or not, it's time for us to mobilize and move things into action, and stop being satisfied. You know, I've watched over the years and done research where it just seems like every little teaspoon we get, you know, we get satisfied. You know, I heard people after Obama got elected, oh, well, you know, we done finally made it. Where do we make it? You know, how can you say that we actually made it? You know, and I told somebody recently, I said, yo, it's great to see a person who looked like me in the office, but I'm still in the same situation I was in when he got elected, you know, before he got elected and after he got elected. So for me, it's one of those things where we can't say that he was there for the Black people. We had a Black person in office, but it's time to actually take grassroots and let those grassroots grow, and let those grassroots grow into legislation. And it's time to make some changes into society where people really feel it and not just give up, you know, after we get that teaspoon, you know, get that teaspoon, but keep scooping into that pot of sugar and make things sweet. You know, don't just give up after you get that one little taste of it. That's not going to help the situation. So regardless as to what happens, be it they both get off, they both get convicted, whatever the case may happen, we as a people need to not give up. We got the fire going. Let's keep cooking with this, you know, because otherwise we're going to be in the same situation next year, the year after that, the year after that. It's not going to change. So it's time for us to really give up with making it and go ahead and move forward and pave these paths so that the people who come after us will have something to look forward to.
All right, and that's a good place to end with. As always, brothers, thank you and enjoyed the conversation. To all of you that have been supporting the Full Circle podcast, we thank you for supporting us, and we'll see you next time.
Lord, yes, papi, hit me one time and make it funky.
I was brought up and taught to have no fear.